So in this video, we're going to be thinking at a microscopic level about the coronavirus and particularly why the protections of hands, face, space work in terms of protecting us from the virus. So let's start with hands. Okay, so we need to wash our hands with soap. And it's really important, the soap. So why is that effective against the virus? Well, if we think about the structure of the coronavirus, so you've seen little cartoons like this. Okay, so the structure of the virus, it has its genome in the middle. That's an RNA genome. It has proteins on the outside, and those help it to attach to the cell and get inside the cell. But luckily for us, there is a membrane around the coronavirus. So that is made of lipids, i.e. fats. Not all viruses have this, but the coronavirus does. It's what we call an enveloped virus. And this means that soap is a surprisingly good strategy for dealing with the virus. So what do we actually mean by soap? Well, soap molecules look like this. They have two bits in them, so they have a head group and they have a tail. That head group is hydrophilic, i.e. it likes water, it's water loving is the literal translation of that. The tail is hydrophobic, i.e. it's water hating. So that means that that hydrophobic tail is attracted to lipids and fats. So what happens is, here's my coronavirus. What happens is these soap molecules come in and they can actually insert themselves into that membrane because they've got this hydrophobic tail. That tail sticks into the membrane, and if you've got enough soap there, what will happen is that in fact the coronavirus, that membrane will break. And once the membrane breaks, obviously the RNA, the genome can escape, so that virus is actually destroyed because we've had these soap molecules come in and break the membrane. So that membrane is a point of vulnerability for the virus. And then what also happens with soap is that then it's, you've got little fragments of virus kicking about. What soap can then do is it can form these kind of little balls effectively. So all of those little soap particles line up like this to kind of form an enclosure around fragments. That's called a micelle. And that can trap the viral fragments. So it's not only destroyed the virus, but it's trapped all the little bits and pieces of virus that we've had, so the virus is no longer infectious. So we're really lucky, in fact, that the coronavirus is an envelope virus. It's got a membrane because that means that soap worked. For some other viruses, soap would be completely ineffective, but because the coronavirus has got that membrane, it means that soap works. Right, so that's hands. Let's think about face. And what we're really thinking about, of course, is masks. Okay, so how do masks work? Well, masks work basically because they're a filter. So let's zoom in on your face mask massively. So it's got some kind of weave in the fabric, which is basically creating a molecular sieve. So there's your fabric. And most face masks that we're talking about, whether that's sort of cloth ones or medical ones, we've got a gap between the fibres of about 1 micrometre. It obviously depends on exactly which mask you've got, what it's made of, but let's say we've got fabric spaces between the fibres of about a micrometre. So how does that work against the virus? Well, this one's a little bit tricky. So the virus itself is about 0.1 micrometres across, so that's 100 nanometres. So actually the virus itself can get through the fibres, okay? So you might be thinking, well, why on earth is that effective? Why are we bothering in that case? Well, it's not the virus itself that we're protecting against health. The virus tends not to be transmitted as these dry individual particles. What's much more apparent is that the virus is spread through droplets. So we have a water droplet. So, you know, when you cough or sneeze or whatever, you release a water droplet that's then got loads of virus particles inside that water droplet. Okay, so the water droplet might be sort of 2 to 5 micrometres across. So the fabric in your mask is big enough to stop the water droplet. It's not actually big enough, or sorry, small enough to stop the virus itself, but it can stop these droplets, and that's where the majority of virus particles are. There aren't many that are transported just as themselves. Most of these are in those water droplets, so if you can catch the water droplets, particularly the ones that you breathe out into your mask, then you're massively reducing the number of virus particles that can get out into the environment. So that's face. Let's then think about space. And for this, we need to think about the way that the virus is transmitted in aerosol droplets. So as I say, most of the virus is being carried on water droplets, not just as the virus itself in the air. So here's a person. Terrible person. Not a good drawing, but there we go. There's a person who is breathing out all of these particles. Now they're going to breathe out a variety of different sizes of droplet. Okay, so quite large droplets, so actual, sort of, almost drops of water that you could see by the naked eye, they will fall pretty close to that person. Okay, so they will fall maybe 0.5 metre from the person. So those are large droplets that are larger than, let's say, 10 micrometres. Okay, so about 0.5 metre away, most of those large droplets will have fallen to the floor. Okay, so certainly being within 0.5 metres of someone, you could be getting really quite a lot of virus that way. We've then got some smaller droplets. So these might be bigger than 5 micrometres, and they are going to fall 1 to 2 metres away. Okay, and each of those droplets has got lots and lots of virus in it. Okay, so if we can stay more than 2 metres away, then we can reduce being exposed to most of those. But what this person's also breathing out are tiny particles or aerosols. So here, these are droplets that are less than 5 micrometres in size. Okay, so the very relatively small water droplets, you can't see these by the naked eye. And those will stay, they'll float in the air for an extended period of time. They might stay hanging around in the air for several hours. Okay, so we obviously don't want to get too close to people, so that's the space thing. But even if we're a reasonable distance away, so here's another person over here, let's say that's a person in a cafe or a restaurant or whatever, if they're in an indoor space, this person has been breathing out aerosols. So let's say this person was in here for an hour. Most of the air in that space will now be containing those aerosol droplets. So you, further than 2 meters away, have still got a chance of breathing in those aerosols, particularly if you don't wear a mask. So the space thing, there's two things about it. So with the social distancing, that's all about these larger droplets so that you're not within 2 meters and getting the large droplets. But it's also why staying outside and having that ventilation is really important, because indoors it's these aerosols, it's these small droplets that you want to be worried about. So that's why you should avoid time spent indoors. And if you are indoors, you should wear a mask, because it's these small water droplets that have got shed loads of viruses in them that are just hanging around in the air. And that's why those restrictions on pubs and restaurants and all the things that are so frustrating to our lives are so important. It's these aerosol droplets that's designed to target. So I would say, if I was the government, I would do the other. I wouldn't go hands, face, space. I would do space, face, hands. Because actually it's a respiratory airborne spreading virus. The most important thing is this space thing and the aerosols. You can protect yourself from that with the face masks, and then as your last port of call, you're washing your hands, so you try and avoid getting the virus onto you. So I think it should be the other way around. I should think it should be space, face, hands, and we might be doing a bit better at viral containment if we thought about it in that way.